Marx. You know, that big beardy boy who had some wacky ideas about capitalism being bad or something like that, I'm not so sure. Whilst we all know Marx's ideas are very important to the modern day, and hey, if you watch a lot of American media, you would know that we now have luxury gay space communist Joe Biden in the presidency. But who actually inspired the Marxist theories that Joe Biden now puts into praxis? Well, let's find out. That's the dumbest joke I've ever done on this channel. So in this video, we're going to be having a brief dive into who inspired Marx's revolutionary, pun intended, political ideology. As some of you may know from my anarchism video, when we talk about more serious theory-based stuff, I have to put on the theory glasses. So I don't have the original ones, they're much nicer, so we're going to have to go for a more traditional look here. Let's talk about Marx. So, jumping in now, Marx was very heavily influenced by Enlightenment philosophers, mainly in their values of democracy, freedom, and egalitarianism. First up, we're going to be diving into probably my favorite philosopher of all time, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau is widely considered to be the first leftist thinker in political philosophy. This is mostly seen in his works The Social Contract and the Discourse on Inequality, which I have right here. Rousseau was one of the first people in history to analyze the negatives of income inequality, and argued that the private ownership of property, which, as we all know, Marx wasn't a massive fan of, was a large cause of the problems we see both politically and personally in society, saying that the ownership of private property sort of poisoned the spirit and encouraged selfishness and negative consequences in society. However, Rousseau had little in the way of practical critiques of what we could now consider capitalism, or much of a solution to any of these problems. His writing is often a bit more abstract than applied. Like every essay and video I've ever written, it's got a lot of waffle and it isn't particularly grounded. And one can see how Marx picked up the Discourse on Inequality and was inspired by its writings, taking these arguments and making them practical. In particular, this focus on the negatives of private property, as well as the need for democracy and freedom, values which Rousseau is very successful in defending, and often people overlook as key ideas in Marx's work. I think a lot of the time people sort of underestimate Marx's valuation of ideas of freedom and democracy. I would argue that what Marx did largely was take Rousseau's arguments for egalitarian democracy and personal freedom in society and then applied it further, mostly to the broader economic world. So taking Enlightenment concepts such as, egalitarianism in the political world and applying it to the democratic world. One of my favorite quotes from Rousseau really sums up how I think Marx looked at his work and really took it forward and sort of moved it beyond the abstract conceptions that it originally had. To summarize this quote, it's simply, "You will say too, I am a dreamer, I admit this. I give my dreams and leave the reader to discover whether there is anything in them which may prove useful to those who are awake." And hey, I'd say Marx definitely managed to find something useful. Just a quick message here before we move on from past Hugh.
Hello, my name is Hugh from Dutiful Future. It's currently snowing, and you should subscribe for this cool slide I'm about to do.
And we're back. So moving on now, beyond Rousseau, to one of the major names that gets brought up if even a scent of Marx is whiffed in the air of academic discussion. This name is Hegel. Hegel, famously a philosopher who no one understands, and I absolutely refuse to believe anyone who says that they do, as well as who Slavoj Zizek aligned more closely with in his debate with Jordan Peterson, rejecting his description of being a Marxist by Peterson, instead calling himself more of a Hegelian, which, side note, pretty hilarious. In my opinion, it was quite an interesting jab to expose the reductionist rhetoric of Peterson's ideas of cultural Marxists, sort of exposing a lack of knowledge on Peterson's part in the area. Marx famously studied Hegelian philosophy for 6 years in Germany, and to summarize Hegel's writings in a very simple manner, it's the idea that the only way to understand history and the events of the modern day is by seeing them as part of an irresistible march towards freedom, truth, and reason. Whilst there is much debate on Hegelian theory with both right-wing and left-wing conceptions, it suggests that historical progress would lead eventually to perfect human freedom. Marx was influenced by Hegel in his conception of history as a progression towards a greater society, however adding a more material lens of analysis, but adopting this image of history as progress. One can see how Hegel's philosophy was very influential in Marx's conception of history as the development of material conditions in the advancement towards a greater society, from feudalism to capitalism to socialism and then eventually communism. Where Marx differed from Hegel, however, is on religion. Marx is famous for his position on religion, believing that the salvation for humanity lay not in God or religious sentiment, but in people. This was inspired by another German philosopher called Ludwig Feuerbach, who accepted Hegel's idea of historical progress, but not in Hegel's religious terms. Feuerbach inspired much of Marx's opinions on religion, specifically, as he famously describes, of religion as an opiate for the masses, distracting workers from their economic and personal self-interest. Also seeing religion as sort of a justification for current power structures. So, the reason that the wealthy are wealthy is not because of any sort of exploitation, but it's because God put them there, as a sort of an entrenchment of oppressive class relations. Moving on now to a surprising influence, which can be seen from daddy capitalist Adam Smith. Adam Smith was a Scottish Enlightenment thinker and was really one of the founders of capitalist thought. He had a specifically strong influence on Marx's labor theory of value. Marx was very critical of Smith's theories for not recognizing that they are only applicable to capitalist institutions in society, not to other conceptions of systems, such as socialism. Marx proposed a systematic correlation between labor value and money prices. So he claimed that the source of profits under capitalism was the value added by workers not paid out in wages. So this representing a system of exploitation. Basically saying that any profit that is made by a company is the value that was created by workers, which wasn't then given to them. Thus, it is not the capitalist ruling class that creates wealth, as is argued under capitalism, but in fact the workers, or as it's often described as, a labor theory of value. So in this sense, Marx's theories of labor and profit were, through opposition, influenced greatly by Adam Smith. His analysis of profit as exploitation in a capitalist system was formed largely by the imagined anger he felt from reading Smith's work. Another interesting area of influence that we can see with Marx was from Charles Darwin, whose work Marx very much enjoyed, but when describing, couldn't help but fit in, a jab here or there. Quite a good quote is when he said, "Although it is developed in the crude English style, this book, which contains the basis on natural history for our view," which, I mean, come on. Developed in a crude English style. Welcome to my channel. Marx actually includes 2 explicit references to Darwin and evolution in the second edition of Das Kapital, in which he relates Darwin's theory of evolution to his opinion about production and technology development over time. One can see how evolution fits well into sort of his material analysis that we went into earlier with Hegel, in which society develops over time, and as the material conditions change, so does the situation that humanity can evolve into. And finally, a quick dive into Proudhon. Proudhon, whose name I'm almost definitely not pronouncing right, is a name who those who are familiar with Marx will have heard several times, often in an antagonistic sense. So, for example, in the Grundrisse, Marx even accuses Proudhon's system of labor value to be crude communism. However, despite the many scathing critiques Marx has written about Proudhon's anarchism or his valuation of labor, he was a major influence on the early Marx. One particular is the need for both political and economic reform in society. So Proudhon, who was part of the February Revolution in France, was very critical of the government after this revolution, as they only focused on political reform rather than the socio-economic change that Proudhon argued was needed for broader emancipation. This can fit in quite well with Marx's taking of Rousseau's opinions on egalitarian democracy and applying it to the economic world. Proudhon was one of the earliest left anarchists that we can see in political theory, and inspired Marx by being a member of the proletariat and fighting for their emancipation. In one of Marx's earliest writings, called The Holy Family, he said that not only does Proudhon write in the interest of the proletariat, he is himself a proletarian. And boom! This has been the influences on Marx. Quick journey across the philosophers and thinkers who inspired and formulated the big dog of leftist politics. Whilst I probably could have talked for about 5 times as long as I have, I hope you enjoyed this quick dive into some of the more influential thoughts on Marx. There's plenty of discussion about Marx and his writings, but not really enough, in my opinion, of what sort of got him to this step. And I think that can really help you understand his arguments. I think a lot of the time his positions on democracy and egalitarianism and freedom are under examined in Marxist theory. And I think that when we look at philosophers who inspired him greatly, most importantly, I would say Rousseau, you can see how important this is. Let me know which of these philosophers you seem to enjoy the most, which was your favorite, and let me know if you have any ideas for the videos you want me to make. Thinking of video ideas is a little bit difficult. If you've got any fun, wacky ideas, please shout them at me. And if you've enjoyed this video, which I hope you have, because I don't know why you'd still be watching if you weren't at this point, please like, comment, subscribe, all of that. We're a very small channel. We're growing slowly, but hey, join the club. We're pretty fun. Thanks so much for watching. Now, here is a compilation of me sledding. You're welcome.
Hello, my name's Hugh from Dutiful Future, and you should subscribe for this cool slide I'm about to do. Oh no.
Hugh, you're losing, mate. Go!
Hi, my name's Hugh from Dutiful Future, and it's currently snowing. You should subscribe for the cool slide I'm about to do. So you're gonna get a run up, that's the thing.